There is no stereotypical victim of sexual assault. That means someone you love or even you could be a target. Hear how the Sexual Violence Prevention Association is working to put a stop to that. Next. Welcome to our Issues Hampton Roads. I'm your host, Ray Pearson. Sexual violence is a pervasive problem with frightening statistics. Like every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. Every 9 minutes, that victim is a child. Meanwhile, only 25 out of 1,000 perpetrators will end up in prison. I don't mean to frighten you, but knowledge is power. Something must be done, and I know you agree. Joining me now is Omni Miranda Martone, founder and CEO of Sexual Violence Prevention Association, an organization committed to preventing sexual violence systematically and working to create a world where people can live free from threat through advocacy, education, and community engagement. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I'm so glad to chat with you. This is a heavy topic, but the thing about it is we've got to deal with the heavy topics in order to make the world better. So thank you for joining me today. So how did Sexual Violence Prevention Association, how did that organization come to be?
Yeah, so I am a survivor of child sexual abuse and campus rape, and I really wanted to prevent this from happening to others. And so I started working in the field. I didn't start the SVPA initially. And so I worked in the field for over 6 years. And we did so many things, right? I worked for the top organizations in the field. We did a lot of really impactful work, helping survivors, providing counseling, legal aid, medical advocacy, all really important things. But about the 5-year mark, I was like, well, that's important. We're not preventing sexual violence before it happens. And that's what I wanted to do. And so I also really knew that sexual violence is often viewed as an issue with like white women as the main victims. But I knew that it was much more important, not more important, but very important for us to acknowledge that it's not just sexism. There's also racism and homophobia and transphobia. And so I, as somebody who is LGBTQ+, as somebody who is, part of marginalized identities, I was like, well, I'm not really seeing that reflected in some of the work. And if we're going to prevent this issue, we need to really understand its roots. And so I started building a community and a coalition of marginalized survivors, people of color, LGBTQ+ people, disabled people, etc. And eventually we decided, well, we should probably start an org. So I founded the Sexual Violence Prevention Association as an organization led by marginalized survivors dedicated to preventing sexual violence systemically.
I love that you are empowering those who are affected, heavily affected, and making them a part of the solution rather than feeling like a victim eternally.
Yes,
Changing that definition. So please, speaking of definitions, define sexual violence for our audience.
Yeah, so sexual violence encompasses all forms of rape, sexual assault, sexual harassment, child sexual abuse, digital sexual violence like image-based sexual assault, which is formerly known as revenge pornography. Really encompasses a wide range of things.
Take me through that. As you said, formerly known as revenge
formerly
pornography.
known as revenge pornography. So it's formerly known as that because people typically think of image-based sexual abuse as a case where a perpetrator, typically somebody's like ex, will share nudes that were originally shared consensually, but now an ex will post them online. That's why it's called revenge pornography, but it actually encompasses a lot more than just that one scenario. And that's why the name is now usually referred to as image-based sexual abuse.
Okay. So we're making sure that it has some weight behind it so they know better.
Exactly. And so that is, that's really the definition of sexual violence. And it's important to acknowledge that, sexual violence is a result of existing power imbalances. And so that can come at the individual, institutional, and systemic level. So at the individual level, that can look like, a perpetrator weaponizing the fact that they're physically stronger than the victim, or that the perpetrator has a weapon, or that the victim's intoxicated, or it's an individual level of power that's being exploited to commit the sexual violence. At the institutional level, that can look like a supervisor or a manager weaponizing their control over an employee's career and income in order to force them to perform sexual acts, right? Or it can look like a landlord doing the same thing with a tenant, a teacher doing the same thing with a student. Basically, it's an institutional level of power and control. And then there's systemic, and that is things like transphobia, homophobia, racism, sexism. And that's when society has these levels of power and oppression, and that's exploited. So it will be something like a white cis male perpetrator and like a black trans woman, and the white, cis male perpetrator will target her because he knows that she's not going to be believed or supported. She's not going to be able to get any sort of resources. And so he's not going to have any accountability. So most sexual violence, takes place not just neatly within, individuals, institutional or systemic. Usually it's a combination of forms of power. But it's important to recognize what forms of power are being used and exploited to commit sexual violence in order to prevent it.
Wow. Wow. Now, why are you so committed? I know that you said in the beginning that you yourself at one point in your life were a victim. And so I'm sure that gravitated or it was a magnet for you towards that being a solution. But tell me, why is it that you've made this your lifelong passion?
Yeah, there's a few reasons. One of the big ones is just truly that there is nobody else doing it, so we need to do it, right? There is nobody else really focusing on the prevention of sexual violence. There's a lot of focus on response, which is vital, but we need to focus on prevention. And part of the reason we need to focus on prevention, and the reason I founded the SVPA, is because I know no amount of healing, no amount of counseling, no amount of time is going to fully repair what happened to me, right? This is going to be with me for the rest of my life. And pretty much every victim I've ever spoken to feels the same way. And so we really need to be preventing this before it happens, because after it happens is too late, right? We should still be providing those services, but that's not the same as it never happening. And so that's really why I'm so dedicated to this issue.
Now, I wanted to know, as you are out changing the momentum of things, do you find healing in that?
Yeah, I think that systemic change and working on this can be very healing. I also think empowering others and working with survivors and being in community with survivors is also very healing.
Wow, that's good. So what obstacles do you face as you're out there advocating and educating? What are the things that are the challenges that you have to overcome that are associated with this topic?
That is a great question. One of the main obstacles is that people don't seem to understand or even be able to fathom sexual violence prevention. I think it's so ingrained in society, and it's so normalized that when we talk about prevention, a lot of people don't know what we're talking about. Or I'll say, I founded the Sexual Violence Prevention Association, and people will say, oh, so like self-defense, or oh, so like that nail polish that tests for roofies. And both of those two things are good. And if somebody wants to use them for their individual safety, that's totally fine. People can do whatever makes them feel safe. But they're not technically preventing sexual violence, because at the end of the day, the perpetrator is just going to pick an easier target. And so we need to be preventing perpetration. We need to be preventing people from wanting to become perpetrators in the first place. And so that really is the crux of it, is getting people to understand when we say prevention, we mean systemic change, really making sure that we're getting this at the absolute root of the problem and not just symptoms of the problem.
Wow. Wow, that's powerful. Now, when we come back, we'll let you know about how parents can best protect their kids from sexual abuse. That's huge. You don't want to miss that.